My father chose pride over my warnings and fired me to hide his lies, leading to his ultimate downfall. The company is yours, he whispered in defeat after I returned, and exposed the truth about what really happened behind closed doors. I'm Kale, 28 male, and my father fired me from my own family's business with a 15-second voicemail. That's how my world cracked open. Not with a bang, but with the cold, clipped tone of the man who was supposed to be my mentor, my guide, my dad. The voicemail arrived at 7:03 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was on my couch scrolling through blueprints on my tablet for our Northgate development, a project I'd poured my soul into for the last 6 months. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was from my father, Silas. I smiled, assuming he was calling with a late-night thought about the project. I let it go to voicemail, wanting to finish my thought before I called him back. A minute later, the notification popped up. I tapped it. The audio was crystal clear, devoid of any emotion or hesitation. Kale, this is your father. Your position as operations manager at Sterling Homes is terminated, effective immediately. You're out of the family business. Don't call back. The message ended. Silence filled my apartment, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. I listened to it again, and a third time, the words didn't change. You're out of the family business. Not we need to talk. Not there's a problem. Just a summary execution, delivered with the same impersonal tone he'd used to cancel a newspaper subscription. My first instinct was a tidal wave of panic, of confusion, of a deep primal hurt. My fingers trembled as I hovered over his contact name. Why, what did I do? We just had dinner on Sunday. We de-argued, but when didn't we? I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation. But then a cold wave of something else washed over me, a bitter, familiar resignation. This was just the final move in a game I'd been losing my entire life. He said not to call back, so I wouldn't. I opened my messaging app, typed a single, stark reply to his number, and hit send. Understood. If he wanted to erase me with a voicemail, I would let him. I would not give him the satisfaction of hearing me beg. Sterling Homes wasn't just a company, it was the story of our family. My grandfather started it after the war, a small, honest outfit that built quality homes. My father, Silas, took it over and, to his credit, scaled it into a regional powerhouse. From the time I was a boy, I was told the business would one day be mine and my brother's. Zane, 4 years younger than me, was the salesman. I was the builder. It was supposed to be a perfect partnership. But my father and I were like two mismatched gears, grinding against each other from the start. He saw the world in terms of profit and loss, authority and obedience. I saw it in terms of integrity and structure. The first major crack appeared when I chose my university major. Silas had a business degree, and he expected the same from me. A business degree is the language of power, Kale, he told me over one of our tense Sunday dinners, my mother, Ilara, nervously refilling his water glass. You need to speak it to lead. I want to understand the bones of what we do, I argued, my 18-year-old voice earnest. I want a degree in structural engineering. It will help us build better, safer homes. It will give us an edge no other developer has. Silas scoffed, waving his fork dismissively. I hire engineers. I don't need to be one. You're being naive. My mother patted my hand. Your father knows best, dear. He just wants you to be prepared. But I wouldn't budge. I saw it as a way to truly honor my grandfather's legacy. Silas saw it as the first act of defiance in a long and tiresome war. He paid the tuition, but a wall went up between us. Meanwhile, my younger brother Zane glided into the business school, chose a major in marketing, and became the golden child. At family gatherings, Silas would boom with laughter as Zane told stories about his classes and networking events. When I tried to share my excitement about learning finite element analysis, my father's eyes would glaze over. That's nice, Kale, he'd say, before turning back to Zane. Now tell me again what that professor said about brand positioning. The second crack came 5 years ago on the Creekwood project. I was a junior manager then, eager to prove my worth. Our longtime lumber supplier had been bought out, and the quality of the materials they sent for the decking was noticeably worse. I ran tests. The wood was softer, less dense, and improperly treated. It would warp within a few years. I brought my findings to Silas, complete with reports and side-by-side comparisons. This is unacceptable, I said, laying the samples on his vast oak desk. We need to reject the shipment and find a new supplier. Silas barely looked at the report. He was looking at a different document, the invoice. This lumber is 15% cheaper, Kale. 15. Do you know what that does to our margin on this project? You're not seeing the bigger picture. You're getting bogged down in details. The details matter, I insisted. This is our name on these homes. People are trusting us. You're costing me money, he said, his voice dropping to a low growl. It was his ultimate accusation. He overruled me. The lumber was used. 2 years later, just as I'd predicted, calls started coming in from angry Creekwood homeowners. Their decks were warping and splintering. It became a small-town news story, a blemish on the Sterling Homes name. In the emergency meeting, Silas didn't admit his mistake. He looked at me across the boardroom table, his eyes filled with disappointment. You should have been more persuasive, he said. The blame was laid at my feet. Zane, who had sold those homes with promises of unmatched quality, just stared at his notepad silent. Sunday dinners were the weekly theater where these dynamics played out. Last Sunday was no different. It was the reason I suspected for the voicemail. We were talking about the Northgate project, the biggest in our company's history. I had discovered that our concrete supplier, a new firm Silas had insisted on using because they offered a competitive price, was cutting corners. They were using a mix with a lower cement-to-aggregate ratio to save money. It would pass initial inspections, but it wouldn't have the 50-year durability we guaranteed. I had tried to approach it carefully. "Dad," I said, passing him the salad bowl, "I have some concerns about the foundation pour at Northgate. The preliminary tests on the concrete mix from Duracon are coming back a little light." Silas stiffened. "What does light mean, Kale?" "It means they're not meeting the specs we require. It's a minor variance now, but over time it could lead to premature cracking. It compromises the integrity of the foundations." "It's within the legal tolerance," he said flatly. "The legal tolerance isn't the sterling standard," I pushed back, my voice quiet but firm. "Granddad wouldn't have accepted it." "That was a mistake." Mentioning his father was always a trigger. His face darkened. "Don't you talk to me about the sterling standard. I built this company into what it is, not him. I understand risk and reward. You understand textbooks." Zane jumped in, ever the peacemaker. "Maybe Kale has a point, Dad. We could ask Duracon to adjust the mix for the next pour. No harm in asking, right?" "The harm," Silas said, pointing his fork at Zane, "is that it shows weakness. It tells them we're picky, that we're difficult to work with. The price goes up, we lose our edge." He then turned his gaze to me. "I am tired of you questioning my decisions, Kale. Your job is to manage operations, not to be the conscience of the company. I handle the big picture." My mother, Ilara, quickly changed the subject. "Zane, dear, tell us about the pre-sales on the Northgate lots. Your father told me they were going wonderfully." The rest of the dinner was a blur of forced cheerfulness. I left feeling defeated but not broken. I thought he'd simmer down. I thought it was just another argument. I never imagined it would end like this. Lying in the dark of my apartment, the single word understood I had sent felt like the only shield I had left. It was a word of compliance, but for me it was a word of defiance. He had drawn a line. I was acknowledging it. The war was over. He had won. The next morning my body woke me at 5:30 a.m. out of sheer habit. For 10 years that alarm had been the starting gun for my day at Sterling Homes. I reached over to silence it and realized I hadn't said it. A hollow ache spread through my chest. My purpose for the day, for the week, for the foreseeable future had been erased. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling as the sun began to cast a gray light into the room. What was my father doing right now? Was he getting ready for work, sipping his coffee as if nothing had happened? Was my mother making his breakfast, her face a mask of placid denial? Did Zane know? Was he already at his desk, preparing to absorb my responsibilities, or was he feeling a pang of guilt? A storm of questions raged in my mind, but they all led back to the same dead end. Don't call back. It was a command, but it was also a fortress wall. By forbidding contact, he had cut off any path to understanding, leaving me to suffocate in a vacuum of unanswered whys. I finally dragged myself out of bed and made coffee. The routine felt absurd, a pantomime of a life I was no longer living. I looked at my reflection in the dark screen of the television. Kale, 28, unemployed. My entire identity had been interwoven with Sterling Homes. I wasn't just the operations manager, I was the son, the successor. Every decision I'd ever made, from my choice of degree to the car I drove, was connected to that life. Now I was just Kale. It felt like a name without a definition. The thought of my desk at the office was a sharp pang. My personal effects were still there. A framed photo of my grandfather and me on a job site when I was 10. A collection of engineering textbooks. A stupid coffee mug that said "World's Okayest Engineer" that Zane had given me as a joke. The thought of my father or one of his assistants boxing up my life was unbearable. That night, long after the office had closed, I used my old keycard. I prayed it hadn't been deactivated yet. The lock clicked green. The building was dark and silent, a ghost of its daytime self. I walked through the halls I knew better than my own apartment, my footsteps echoing in the emptiness. My office door was unlocked. Everything was exactly as I had left it. The Northgate blueprints were still spread across my desk. A sticky note with a reminder to call a surveyor was stuck to my monitor. It was a perfect, undisturbed fossil of a life that had ended 28 hours earlier. I didn't turn on the lights. Working by the glow of the city lights outside the window, I quickly and quietly packed my things into a single cardboard box. The photo of my grandfather went in first. I ran my thumb over his smiling face. He had believed in building things that last. What would he think of his son now? As I was about to leave, I hesitated. On my computer, locked in a sleep, was years of my work. My meticulous project plans, my supplier analysis, my safety protocols, specifically the file containing my test results and correspondence about the substandard concrete from Duracon. My first instinct was to wipe the drive, to take my intellectual property with me. It felt like justice. But I couldn't do it. Destroying that data felt like a violation of my own principles. That information wasn't just mine, it was critical to the safety and integrity of the company, whether I was a part of it or not. Leaving it was an act of quiet protest. It was proof that I had done my job right up until the end. I took my box, walked out of the office, and didn't look back. The second day was worse. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a deep, gnawing dread. I forced myself to go for a run, hoping to sweat out the anxiety, but every street I ran down seemed to have a Sterling Homes sign on a lawn or a new build in progress. The company was everywhere, my father's legacy. It was inescapable. My phone remained silent. Not a word from Zane, not a text from my mother asking if I was okay. It was as if the voicemail had not only fired me but had also erased me from the family's memory. The silence was the cruelest part. It confirmed that this wasn't a rash decision made in anger by my father alone. This was a coordinated family verdict. I had been voted off the island. My savings were decent. I could survive for months, even a year if I was careful. I started browse job sites for engineering positions, but it felt like a betrayal, like I was cheating on a life I hadn't even properly mourned yet. The descriptions all seemed so sterile, so corporate. Manage project timelines. Optimize resource allocation. At Sterling, I wasn't just managing resources, I was building homes, I was building a future. Late in the afternoon of the second day, I finally cracked. The loneliness was a physical weight. I picked up my phone to call Zane, my thumb hovering over his name. I wouldn't ask about the business. I would just ask if he was okay. I just needed to hear a familiar voice. But what would I say, and what if he was cold and distant? What if he recited the company line, coached by our father? The thought of hearing that kind of rejection from my own brother was more than I could bear. My pride, or perhaps my fear, won out. I put the phone down. Understood was my last word, and I would stick to it. I ordered a pizza I had no appetite for and turned on the TV, hoping for a distraction. A mindless action movie was on, but I couldn't follow it. My thoughts kept drifting back to the Northgate project. I pictured the crews pouring that weak concrete into the foundations. I saw the faces of the families who would one day live in those homes, trusting in the Sterling name. A cold knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach. It wasn't my problem anymore, I told myself, but it felt like it was. It was just after 7 p.m., almost exactly 48 hours since my father's message, when my phone finally rang. The screen lit up with a picture of Zane and me, arms slung around each other at a baseball game years ago. We looked so young, so happy. I stared at it, my heart pounding in my chest. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for anything, for an apology, for an accusation, for a final goodbye. Then I answered the call. Hello, Kale. It was Zane's voice, but not his usual confident, easygoing tone. It was thin, strained, and trembling with a panic I had never heard from him before. In the background, I could hear papers shuffling and what sounded like another person's muffled, frantic voice. Zane, what's wrong? I asked, sitting bolt upright. Your voice is shaking. He took a ragged breath. Kale, something's happened, something Ribbles, you were right. Oh God, you were so right. Zane, slow down. What are you talking about? I said, my own voice now tight with alarm. Where are you? I'm at the office, he stammered, his words tumbling over each other in a rush. Dad and we've been here all night. Kale, it's Northgate, it's the concrete, it's all a disaster. A cold, heavy feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't satisfaction or vindication, it was dread. What happened? A city inspector showed up today, Zane explained, his voice cracking. A surprise site visit. Someone must have tipped him off, I don't know. He wasn't one of the usual guys. This one was sharp, by the book. He took one look at the foundation work on Phase 1 and flagged it. He took core samples on the spot. I closed my eyes, picturing it perfectly. I knew what those samples would show. And, I prompted, though I already knew the answer. The results came back an hour ago. They failed. They failed spectacularly, Kale. The compressive strength is almost 30% below the specified grade. The inspector called it gross negligence. He's issued a full stop work order on the entire Northgate development. He's talking about pulling our operating licenses. I sank back into my couch, the phone pressed hard against my ear. The minor variance Silas had been so dismissive of wasn't minor at all. Duracon hadn't just been cutting corners, they'd been serving us sand and water. And that's not the worst part, Zane continued, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. The developer, Northgate isn't our project, Kale, it's a contract build. We're building for a national REIT. Their chief legal counsel called Dad an hour ago. They're invoking the breach of contract clause. They're preparing a lawsuit for the full value of the project plus damages. They're going to bury us. The room spun. This was worse than my most dire predictions. This wasn't just a blemish on the company name like the Creekwood Decks. This was an extinction-level event. A lawsuit of that magnitude would bankrupt Sterling Homes 3 times over. Everything my grandfather built, everything my father expanded, could be gone in a matter of weeks. "Where's Dad now?" I asked, my voice eerily calm. Zane let out a shaky, humorless laugh. "He's in his office just staring at the wall. I've never seen him like this. He's been on the phone with his lawyer with the bank. There's no way out. The evidence is literally set in stone. He keeps saying the same thing over and over. Cale warned me. Cale told me." The words sent a bitter, painful shockwave through me. So now he remembered. Now that the walls were collapsing around him, he remembered my warnings. They weren't just the ramblings of a naive, textbook-spouting son anymore. They were the prophetic words he had chosen to ignore. "Why are you telling me this, Zane?" I asked quietly. It was the crucial question. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him take a deep, shuddering breath. Because I didn't know, Cale. I swear, I knew you and Dad argued about the supplier, but I thought it was just business as usual. I didn't know you had hard evidence. Dad told me you were being overly cautious. He never showed me your reports. After he sent that message, he told me it was because you were being insubordinate and that your attitude was affecting morale." "And you believed him," I stated. "It wasn't an accusation, just a fact." "Yes," Zane admitted, his voice thick with shame. "I did. I'm so sorry, Cale. I should have called you. I should have stood up for you. But I was a coward. I always let Dad handle things." His apology, so raw and genuine, chipped away at the icy wall I had built around my heart. For 48 hours, I had felt utterly alone. Now, for the first time, I felt a glimmer of connection, however fraught it was with panic and regret. "It's his fault," Zane continued, his voice rising with a desperate edge. "But it's our name, Cale. It's Granddad's name. We can't let it end like this. The employees, the site managers, the carpenters, the office staff, they have families. They're all going to lose their jobs." He was right. My anger was with Silas, but the fallout would hit dozens of innocent people. People I had hired. People I had worked with every day. Men and women who trusted the Sterling name to provide for their families. "Dad, he doesn't know what to do," Zane pleaded, his voice finally breaking completely. "He's broken, Cale. He needs you. I need you, please. Will you just come down here? Will you just meet with us?" I looked around my quiet apartment. My box of office belongings sat by the door, a pathetic symbol of my exile. My future was a blank, unwritten page. To go back to that office, to face the man who had so coldly cast me out, felt like the hardest thing in the world. It felt like surrender. But Zane's plea hung in the air. "He needs you, did he? Or did he just need a scapegoat, a fixer, someone to clean up the mess he had created?" My mind flashed back to the file I had left on my computer. The proof, the timeline, the warnings, I had left it as a testament to my integrity. Now it seemed it might be the only thing that could save the company from utter ruin. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. "But Zane, this is not a rescue mission. This is a post-mortem." I hung up the phone before he could reply. The void was over. The silence had been shattered, and I was about to walk back into the heart of the storm. The drive to the office was surreal. The streets were dark, the city winding down for the night, while I felt like I was driving into a war zone. When I walked through the glass doors of Sterling Homes, the brightly lit lobby felt alien. It was the same place I'd walked into every day for a decade, but tonight I felt like a stranger, an intruder. Zane met me by the elevators, his face pale and drawn. His usually perfect hair was a mess and his eyes were red-rimmed. He looked like he'd aged 5 years in the last 5 hours. "Thanks for coming," he said, his voice low and hoarse. I just nodded, unable to summon any words of comfort. We rode the elevator up to the executive floor in silence. The familiar chime as the doors opened sounded like a signal for a battle to begin. The boardroom was at the end of the hall, its glass walls revealing the scene inside. My father, Silas, sat at the head of the immense mahogany table. He wasn't the powerful, commanding patriarch I was used to. He was slumped in his chair, his tie loosened, staring down at his hands. He looked small, defeated. My mother, Alara, stood behind him, her hand on his shoulder, her expression a mixture of fear and defiance. She looked up as we entered, and her eyes, which had always been warm towards me, were now filled with a desperate, pleading light. I walked in and stood at the opposite end of the table, placing my keys down with a quiet click that seemed to echo in the tense silence. Zane hovered nervously by the door. For a long moment, no one spoke. Silas didn't look at me. He just kept staring at the polished surface of the table as if the answers were written in the wood grain. I decided to be the one to break the silence. My voice was calm, steady, and clinical. Zane said, "There's a problem." Silas flinched at the sound of my voice. He finally lifted his head, and our eyes met for the first time since he'd kicked me out of his life. The arrogance was gone. In its place was a raw, haggard look of a man who had stared into the abyss and seen it staring back. "The inspector," he began, his voice raspy, "the lawsuit." "I know the headlines, Dad," I cut in, my tone still even. "I want to hear the details. I want you to tell me what happened. Why did the concrete fail?" My mother took a step forward. "Kale, now is not the time for blame. We are a family and we are in a crisis. We need to stick together." "With all due respect, Mom," I said, turning my gaze to her, "this crisis happened because we didn't stick together. It happened because I was told my concerns didn't matter. So please let him answer the question." Alara recoiled as if I'd slapped her, a wounded look on her face. She was so used to smoothing over conflict, to papering over the cracks in our family's foundation, that my directness was a foreign language to her. I looked back at Silas. "Tell me." He took a shaky breath and began to speak. He admitted to pressuring Duracon for a better price. He admitted to seeing their initial test results as within an acceptable range of deviation. He admitted that when I brought him my own, more thorough analysis, he saw it not as a warning, but as a challenge to his authority. "I thought you were trying to undermine me," he said, his voice cracking. "In front of your brother at the dinner table, you and your engineering talk always making it seem like I didn't understand the fundamentals of my own business. I thought you were trying to make me look weak." The confession was so petty, so rooted in his own insecurity that it took my breath away. This wasn't a calculated business decision gone wrong. This was a father's ego poisoning his own well. He would rather risk the entire company than admit his son might know something he didn't. "And firing me?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "How did that fit into your plan?" He finally broke eye contact, looking back down at the table. "It was a mistake," he whispered. "I was angry, I felt cornered. I thought if I removed the dissenting voice, the problem would go away. I thought I could manage it. I thought I could control it." There it was, the core of Silas Sterling. Control. He had to be the one in charge, the one with the answers, the one who made the rules. My presence, my questions, my very expertise had become a threat to T. Had control, so he had eliminated the threat. And in doing so, he had lit the fuse on a bomb that had now detonated in his face. "So you fired me to protect your pride," I said, the words hanging in the air, cold and sharp. "And in doing so, you have likely destroyed the company my grandfather built, tarnished his name, and threatened the livelihoods of over 100 employees. Was it worth it?" He had no answer. He just shook his head slowly, a single tear tracing a path down his weathered cheek. It was the first time in my adult life I had ever seen my father cry. The sight didn't bring me any joy. It just deepened the cavernous feeling of loss in my chest. Zane finally spoke, stepping forward. "Kale, the lawyer said, there's no defense, the evidence is clear. The contracts are ironclad, we're facing total liquidation, we'll lose everything. The house, the business, all of it." My mother finally broke, sinking into a chair beside Sila's, her composure crumbling into quiet sobs. The sight of my parents, so utterly broken and helpless, was disorienting. They had always been the immovable forces in my life. Now they were just two scared people who had lost their way. I stood there at the end of the long table, the full weight of the situation settling upon me. They hadn't just called me here for a confession. They had called me here for a miracle. They had burned the house down and were now asking the man they'd thrown out into the cold to run back into the flames and save them. A heavy silence descended upon the boardroom, filled only by my mother's quiet weeping. My father, Silas, remained a statue of regret, his gaze fixed on the table. Zane looked at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, pleading hope. He saw me as the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. Silas finally cleared his throat, gathering some small remnant of his former authority. "Kale," he said, his voice strained but direct. "Your job, your position as operations manager, it's yours again, effective immediately. We'll double your salary, give you a partnership stake, whatever you want. We need you to fix this." The offer was everything I had once dreamed of, a partnership, a real say in the company's direction, the respect I had craved for so long, but hearing it now under these circumstances, it felt like an insult. It was a bribe born of desperation, not a reward earned through merit. He wasn't offering me a seat at the table, he was asking me to rebuild the table he had just smashed to pieces. I let the silence stretch out, walking slowly from my end of the table toward the windows that overlooked the city. The lights of downtown twinkled, oblivious to the drama unfolding in our glass tower. "Let's be perfectly clear about what you're asking," I said, my back still to them. "You're asking me to step in and solve a problem of your making, a problem you fired me to stop me from preventing. You want me to talk to the inspectors, to negotiate with the developers, to face the very people you lied to through your deliberate negligence." I turned around to face them. "You're not offering me a job, Dad, you're offering me your consequences." Silas flinched, but he nodded. "Yes," he conceded softly, "I am." "I reject your offer," I said simply. The air went out of the room. Zane's face fell, my mother's crying hitched. My father looked up, a flicker of his old, defiant anger in his eyes. What does that mean? You're just going to walk away, let the company die, let your family go bankrupt? I might, I replied evenly. That is certainly an option, perhaps it's the natural consequence. The business failed because its leadership failed, maybe it should die. Kale, please, Zane begged, stepping toward me. Think about the employees. Think about Maria in accounting who just had a baby. Think about Frank's crew on the framing team. Most of them have been with us for 20 years. What happens to them? He knew exactly which nerve to touch. My anger was with my father, but my loyalty was to the people I worked alongside. The people who showed up every day and did their jobs with pride, trusting that the person at the top was steering the ship correctly. They were the true victims of Silas's hubris. I looked from Zane's desperate face to my father's broken one. A choice lay before me, stark and monumental. I could walk away, preserve my pride, and start fresh somewhere else, leaving them to their fate. It would be just, it would be deserved, or I could step into the fire. I could fight for the legacy, for the employees, for the very name on the building. But I could not do it under the old regime. I walked back to the table and leaned my hands on it, looking directly at my father. I will not come back as your employee, I said, my voice leaving no room for negotiation. The relationship where you have authority over me is over. It ended with your voicemail. I stood up straight. Here are my terms. I will agree to step in and try to salvage Sterling Homes on one condition. Effective tomorrow morning, you will announce your immediate retirement as CEO. You will step down from the board. You will become a silent partner with no operational authority whatsoever. You will not come to the office. You will not speak to clients. You will not contact suppliers. I paused, letting the weight of my words sink in. I will take over as acting CEO. I will have full, unconditional control over all aspects of the business. I will make the decisions. I will implement the strategy. I will be the one to clean this up. My mother gasped, Kale, you can't ask your father to. I'm not asking, I interrupted, my gaze still locked on Sila's. This is the only way forward. The trust is gone. The brand is compromised because your name is associated with this disaster. The only way to signal to the inspectors, the developers, and the banks that things have fundamentally changed is for the leadership to change. You need to be gone. I then turned to my brother. Zane, you can stay on as head of sales, but you'll report to me. We'll work together, but as colleagues, not as a younger brother hiding behind dad. Zane just nodded, looking relieved and terrified at the same time. Finally, I looked back at Silas. The choice was his. He could cling to the last vestiges of his power and watch his empire crumble, or he could sacrifice his pride to give it a chance to survive. The man who had demanded total control now had to surrender it completely. He sat there for what felt like an eternity, the silence thick with the weight of 60 years of life, of pride, of ambition. He looked at my mother, whose face was a storm of conflicting emotions. He looked at Zane, his chastened younger son. Then he looked at me, his estranged heir, the one who was now demanding his crown. He let out a long, slow sigh of defeat. The fight was gone, the arrogance was gone, all that was left was the stark reality of his failure. All right, Kale, he said, his voice barely a whisper. You win, the company is yours. The next morning felt like the first day of a new world. I was back at my desk by 6 a.m., but it wasn't my old office, it was Silas's. The vast oak-paneled room felt less like a workplace and more like a mausoleum of a fallen king. His personal effects were gone, my mother must have packed them up in the dead of night. All that remained was the furniture, the view, and the crushing weight of responsibility. My first act as CEO of a company on life support was to call an all-hands emergency meeting for 8 a.m. I didn't hide in the boardroom. I stood in the middle of the main office floor with everyone from the senior accountants to the interns gathered around me. The fear and uncertainty in the room were palpable. Rumors were already flying. Good morning, I began, my voice clear and steady. I'm sure you have a lot of questions, and I'm going to be completely transparent with you. As of last night, Silas Sterling has retired as CEO. I have taken over leadership of the company, effective immediately. A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. I'm not going to sugarcoat this, I continued. We are in serious trouble. Due to a failure in material standards on the Northgate project, a stop work order has been issued, and we are facing a significant legal and financial challenge. Jobs are at risk. Our company's future is at risk. I let that sink in. I saw the fear on their faces turn to dread. But I said, raising my voice slightly, I did not take this job to oversee the liquidation of Sterling Homes. I took this job to save it, and I cannot do it alone. I looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as I could. The problem that caused this was a failure of leadership at the very top. It was not a failure of our people. I know the quality of your work. I trust every one of you. What I need from you now is that same trust. It will be hard. There will be long days and sleepless nights. but I have a plan and I believe we can get through this together. My second call was to the city inspector's office. I didn't make excuses, I didn't deflect blame, I owned the problem completely. My name is Cale Sterling, I said. I'm the new CEO of Sterling Homes. I'm calling about the stop work order at the Northgate site. Your inspector was absolutely correct. Our previous leadership made a catastrophic error. My only goal now is to make it right. I spent an hour on the phone with a deputy commissioner, outlining a preliminary remediation plan. We would demolish and remove every cubic inch of the faulty foundations at our own cost. We would hire a third-party engineering firm to oversee the new pour and provide certified, transparent reports directly to his office. We would not ask for the stop work order to be lifted until we were in full compliance, far exceeding the minimum requirements. He was skeptical, but my directness meant to disarm him. He agreed to a site meeting the next day. It was a tiny first step, but it was a step away from the cliff edge. Zane appeared in my doorway around mid-morning, looking hesitant. Got a minute? Of course, come in, I said, waving him to a chair. He sat down, looking uncomfortable in the office that had always been our father's domain. That was quite a speech this morning, he said. It was the truth, I replied. It's the only thing we have left to trade on. Listen, Cale, he said, leaning forward. I know I let you down. I should have backed you up at that dinner. I should have questioned Dad harder. I'm sorry. We all have things we should have done, Zane, I said, my tone softening. The old way of doing things is over. Dad pitted us against each other, intentionally or not. You were the favored son, the salesman he understood. I was the difficult one, the engineer who brought him problems. That dynamic is broken. From now on, we work together. I need you. Your sales skills, your relationships with our clients. They're more important than ever. But I need your honest counsel even when it's difficult. He nodded, a look of profound relief on his face. You've got it. So what's my first assignment, boss? He asked, a small, genuine smile finally appearing. Get on the phone with every single Northgate presale client, I instructed. Tell them exactly what happened. Tell them we made a huge mistake and that I am personally overseeing the fix. Tell them there will be delays, but that we will deliver a home with an unimpeachable foundation. Offer them a 5% discount on their purchase price for their trouble. Some will walk. Most, hopefully, will respect the honesty. It was a new chapter for us, not just as colleagues but as brothers. The old hierarchy was gone, replaced by a shared sense of purpose born from crisis. Later that afternoon, I had my first and only interaction of the day with my parents. My mother called my cell. Cale, dear, she began, her voice strained with false brightness. I was just wondering what time you'll be home for dinner. The question was so jarringly normal, so steeped in denial, that I was momentarily stunned. Mom, I said gently, I'm not coming for dinner. Nothing is home for dinner anymore. The company is on the brink of collapse. I'll be lucky if I get home before midnight. Oh, she said, her voice small. Well, your father is very upset. He should be, I said, a touch of ice creeping into my voice. He has a lot to be upset about, as do I, as do 100 other people whose jobs are on the line because of his pride. He's still your father, she whispered. And he is the man who fired me via voicemail and nearly destroyed our family's legacy, I countered. Our relationship for the foreseeable future is that of a majority shareholder and a CEO, nothing more. I'll send him a formal weekly report. Please don't call me about dinner again. I ended the call, my hand trembling slightly. It was a harsh, painful boundary to draw, but it was a necessary one. The old family dynamic was the disease that had nearly killed the company. The only cure was a clean, professional separation. The warmth of family had been replaced by the cold, hard reality of the balance sheet. It was a terrible trade, but it was the only one that would ensure our survival. The months that followed were the most grueling of my life. My prediction of long days and sleepless nights was an understatement. It was a war fought on multiple fronts. The first battle was physical, the demolition of the faulty foundations. I was on the Northgate site every single day, overseeing the jackhammers and excavators as they tore out my father's mistake. It was a loud, dusty, and incredibly expensive symbol of our new beginning. We were literally breaking down the old to build something better. The second battle was financial. The lawsuit from the REIT was a guillotine hanging over our heads. I met with their lawyers personally. I didn't bring my father's bulldog attorneys. I brought our new third-party engineering reports, my detailed remediation plan, and a humility they weren't expecting. I admitted our fault completely. I showed them the new standards we were implementing, standards that far exceeded the contract's requirements. Instead of fighting, I proposed a new partnership, one built on radical transparency. It took weeks of tense negotiations, but in the end they agreed to put the lawsuit on hold, contingent on our performance. They didn't drop it, but they gave us a chance to breathe. Zane was a revelation. Freed from the shadow of our father, he blossomed. He was on the phone constantly, not just with the Northgate clients, but with all our partners. He used his natural charm not to spin or deflect, but to deliver the hard truth with empathy and a promise of a better future. He saved dozens of relationships and contracts that I, with my engineering-focused approach, would have likely lost. We became a true team. He was the voice, I was the hammer. The relationship with my parents remained fractured and strange. True to my word, I sent a formal written report to my father's home email every Friday afternoon. It detailed our progress, our setbacks, our cash flow, and our revised projections. He never replied. I saw them only once a quarter at the newly established board meetings held in a neutral rented office space. Silas would sit silently at the end of the table, looking like a ghost in his own life story, while I walked the other members through the company's painful but steady recovery. My mother would sit beside him, her expression unreadable. There was no warmth, no small talk, just the cold, hard facts of the business that now separated us. It was a profound and constant ache, a reminder of all I had lost to get what I never knew I wanted. It took over a year, but we clawed our way back. We completed the Northgate project, 6 months behind schedule and with almost zero profit margin, but with foundations so solid you could build a skyscraper on them. Our reputation, once shattered, was slowly being rebuilt on a new cornerstone of integrity. We didn't just survive, we were becoming a better, stronger company. The ultimate lesson from this painful saga wasn't about business or concrete. It was about the nature of family and respect. I learned that true family isn't built on unconditional obedience or blind loyalty. That's the structure of a dictatorship, not a home. Real family, like a real foundation, has to be built on something stronger: mutual respect, honesty, and the courage to tell each other the truth, especially when it's hard. My father built an empire on control, and his fear of losing that control led him to nearly destroy it all. I had to be cast out of my family to finally find my place in it, not as a subordinate son but as an equal. My relationship with Zane is stronger than ever, but my relationship with my parents is an emotional ruin. We saved the Sterling name, but the Sterling family, as I knew it, is gone forever. It's a sad truth, but it's a solid one, and I've learned that it's better to build on hard truth than on comfortable lies. So I'll ask you, the audience, this: have you ever been in a situation where standing by your principles put you at odds with the people you love? What choice did you make? Sometimes doing the right thing comes at a terrible personal cost. It can feel lonely and it can make you question everything. But when you build your life on a foundation of integrity, you create something that can weather any storm.